Hello, and welcome to this week's Jessica Recommends. I'm wondering if we can guess from the shirt of the day what we're going to be talking about today. Books, like every time, but also ghosts specifically. Before we get into that and my history with ghosts, let's talk about what I'm reading this week. I just finished this morning Polistan by Neil Stevenson. It's the first book in a new series he's doing. It was really good. It's really interesting. As per the usual with his books, there's a bunch of science I don't understand, but I'm just along for the ride and I'm fine with that. Really good though. It just came out actually. This is the advanced copy, but you can get the regular one. And so I just started Sharon McMahon's The Small and the Mighty, and I'm actually going to see her tonight with my sister. I'm very excited about that. I love seeing her speak. She is so fascinating, so articulate. She just really helps you understand things with government and history and things like that. I love her. Right now, I am reading aloud to the kids, The Willoughbys. We did read it aloud a few years ago, but the youngest doesn't remember. And I just got the sequel, The Willoughbys Return. So we'll do that next. And I am listening to and not really loving The House of Seven Gables by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I generally love classics and stuff, but just, I don't know. It's, I'm waiting for something to happen and nothing's happened so far. So let's talk about ghosts, which is something I don't actually like to do. I'm not big on ghost stories. I have always been a scaredy cat, and that is the thing that I'm afraid of. Um, so when I say I'm a scaredy cat, I specifically mean ghosts, haunted houses, that kind of thing. I don't like that. Um, yeah, no, I don't like those types of, I don't really care for horror, like slasher horror at all, but if there's anything even sort of ambient with a ghost, like that Nicole Kidman movie, The Others and stuff like that, I can't even believe I sat through that entire movie because I thought I was going to have to just jump up and run out screaming of the theater because I don't know why I went. That sort of thing just absolutely sends me through the roof. One of my teachers in grade school read us Wait Till Helen Comes uh, by Mary Downing Hahn. And I just sat there like in a full panic every day after lunch recess. I just remember sitting there gripping my chair and trying not to listen to her because I was afraid to speak up and didn't want other people to make fun of me, but I was terrified for every page of that book. I did not like it. So, but surprisingly, when I was like, oh, but like I want to talk about ghosts because it's Halloween, I do have some very favorite books that are about ghosts, but some of them are very different. Um, I like very cute ghosts. I like Casper type of ghosts. I'm fine with that. And I like very odd ghosts for like older people. I understand the need for justice and revenge from beyond the grave, I guess. So I'm okay with that as long as it's not too scary. So, but I have some really fun things to talk about this week. And it kind of surprised me how many books I was pulling off my shelf, like, oh, got to talk about this one, got to talk about that one. And I actually have a ton that I'm going to mention that I do not own because I love them, but I do not want a copy in my home, if that makes sense. So I actually have like a list of things that I'm going to talk about like towards the end that are like you should definitely read, but I can't sleep with it in my house. So good luck to you. But let's start off though with one of my all-time favorite picture books, Ghosts in the House. This is absolutely delightful. Kazuno Kohara, sorry, no reading glasses on, about a little girl and her cat who move into, the art is just so fun. And they move into a house and then they realize the house is haunted. But the girl is not just a regular girl, she is a witch. And so she washes the ghosts and hangs them out to dry. She irons them and uses them for things like sheets and curtains and things like that. And it's adorable. It is so cute and so fun. Um, Although it does have one hilarious one-star review on Goodreads from someone who was like incredibly offended that these like spirits of poor, troubled people would be used in this fashion. And she believes that this is setting a bad example for children to depict a witch ironing a ghost and using it as a sheet because it might encourage children. And I'm like, encourage them to do what? Anyway, people are fun, but ghosts are even more fun in this book anyway. So I'm still not over that review. It was my favorite thing. Leo, A Ghost Story by Mac Barnett and Christian Robinson is the absolutely delightful story of a little boy named Leo who is a ghost and his quest to find a friend. And I'm all for that. That is an acceptable ghost. He makes a friend, and it is just delightful. And I love the style of the art. So great. Christian Robinson did the pictures, and Mac Barnett, of course, you know, he usually collaborates with like John Clausen, and they did extra yarn and all those I Want My Hat Back and stuff like that. So I love a Leo, A Ghost Story. I also love this one, which is super odd. The Little Ghost Who Was a Quilt by Real Nason and Byron Eggenschweiler. So this is if you want a cozy ghost story. Here is this little ghost. He is different. He's a quilt. He's so precious. And he just kind of wants to fit in, but he can't do some of the things that other ghosts do. And look at how gorgeous this art is. I mean, honestly, he can't do some of the things other ghosts do, and he wants to participate in Halloween, but he's a quilt, not a regular ghost. It's so cute. And of course, this most more recent book, Gustavo the Shy Ghost by Flavia Z. Drago. And she's taken on like other Halloween characters. She's got one about a witch, she's got one about a vampire, and they are all great. But I especially love Gustavo. He is just so darling, and he is a sweet little ghost, but he's shy. So he wants to have friends, wants to have all these other monsters and things come over on Halloween and get to know him, but how? It's a really precious book for kids who are shy but want to take part in the fun. It's a really great book to read with them and like help them see how they can still make friends and still be shy. So those are our picture book recommendations. And of course, there I was not afraid of everything all the time as a kid that had to do with ghosts, but and so I do still have my very old copies of House of the Clock and Its Walls, which I mostly just John Belair's, I mostly just remember the fuse box dwarf, which is a really weird thing that his uncle had invented to guard the fuse box for some inexplicable reason. So I mostly just remember that and thinking it was funny and that that is a really weird, sad, pitiable thing to just jump out and yell, Dreeb, I'm the fuse box dwarf, which is what the little boy in the book thinks about that. And I love the new movie though. It is about my threshold of scary. That's where I'm at. But I love the new movie with Jack Black. I think it is super fun and it's a really interesting adaptation of that story. And this, The Ghost of Windy Hill, if you can find a copy of this bad boy, this by Clyde Robert Bulla, whose books are still around and still read for things like Battle of the Books, but I've not seen this one in eons. The Ghost of Windy Hill is a really fun sort of gothic ghost story for kids from way back in the day, and that's a good one if you've got your kids that are not as into ghosts and stuff because the modern stuff is terrifying. Doll Bones by Holly Black about Undid Me. Newbery Honor Book. I got it and was gonna read it aloud to my kids and then thought, you know what, I better like read this first. I barely made it through this book. I'm like, there's no way I could read this aloud to my kids. They will lose their minds. It is a super scary wait till Helen comes-ish type of things that involves a couple of scary things, namely creepy dolls and and ghosts. But I did enjoy it overall, actually, and that's why I'm recommending it. I really did like it, but it is super creepy. But for some reason, kids are less bothered by that. Like with Coraline, I thought Coraline was so terrifying. I was reading it aloud when it first came out, alone in my house. And my husband came in and I'm like, I can't read this book when you're not here. You've got to sit here with me while I read this with the lights on. And Neil Gaiman has said that he only gets that response from adults. Adults would come to his signings and go, how could you write such a scary book for children? And kids are just like, this is the coolest book ever. I love this story. And all my friends' kids that are into Coraline are really small. And I'm like, aren't you terrified? They're like, no, it's so great. So kids get into that spooky stuff. And if they know, and they do know inherently that like there is not a haunted doll that's going to come out and get them, so they recognize that. But me, I was convinced there was a haunted doll somewhere that was going to get me as a kid. And so I didn't do very well even as a kid with ghost stories, but lots of kids absolutely love them. And I see lots of things online where people are oh, my daughter wants to get into horror. She is 11. What should I do? And people are recommending just like slasher movies and like the most terrifying horror novels, gory stuff, very R-rated. And I'm like, what is wrong with you? There are so many books for that age group that are excellent. That if you've got a kid who's like, what are horror movies? I want to get into horror. You do not need to show them you don't need to show them Halloween or, something like that. You don't need to have them read adult horror fiction. You can have them read stuff like Doll Bones. You can have them read John Bellairs books. You can have them read some Neil Gaiman, Coraline. I don't see that. I saw that on a list of ghost books though, and I'm like, are they ghosts? I think they're I don't know, evil spirits or something. But anyway, the Graveyard Book, though, is about ghosts. If you don't know the Graveyard Book, which was his Newbery winning book from a few years ago, if you're not sure what it's about, it is really good. It is basically a like was going to say spoof. It's not a spoof. It's in honor of, basically, it's an homage, if you will, to The Jungle Book by Rudyard Kipling. So it's about a boy being raised in a different environment by people who are not human. And but in his case, he is a baby who escapes. His family is murdered, and he crawls out the door and crawls away and into the local graveyard. And the ghosts hide him. And a ghost couple who were never blessed with children in their lifetime decide to raise him. And they name him Nobody Owens because nobody owns him, and that is the name on a tombstone that they see. And he goes by Bod, and he is raised in this graveyard. He knows all the ghosts. He is tutored by Silas, who is a vampire. It's a very, very interesting story. And it's sort of just all these anecdotes, just the same way Jungle Book is. It's all these anecdotes about Bod's life that are sort of threaded together leading up to the end, and it does have a definite end and is really great. It also reminded me a lot of a Ray Bradbury Halloween story as well. Less than Rudyard Kipling. It reminded me more of From the Dust Returned or something by Ray Bradbury. Liesel and Poe by Lauren Oliver. Lauren Oliver has done some really great young adult books like Panic and things like that, but she also did this excellent middle grade book called Liesel and Poe about two kids who are friends, and one of them is a ghost. And it's not at all scary. It's more of sort of a supernatural mystery. And I got this arc, these many years ago. Book came out in 2011. I think I got it in 2010. It's really great. It stayed with me. I had my oldest read it when he was 11, 12 years old. He really liked it too. It's really a good book. Liesel and Poe by Lauren Oliver. Now, I searched for ever and cannot find um Headless Cupid, which as a kid totally undid me. My fifth grade teacher read it out loud to us around Halloween. I could barely handle it. I was clinging to my seat, wishing it would just end. But I think about it all the time. And so as an adult, I got a copy, which I now can't find. It's somewhere in this mess. Can you see that there's still mess? I just have not. Anyway, I don't care. You can see my mess. But They are the Stanley family are these books, and there are several books about them. The Headless Cupid was the first one, and it's really great. It's got a ton going on for it. It's about a blended family. The parents have just gotten married, so they've got step siblings kind of learning to deal with each other, and ghosts. And Blair, who is the youngest boy, Blair is very special. Throughout the books, Blair sees things that not everyone else can see. He talks to people that not everyone else can see, and things like that. And it's spooky, but ultimately it's honestly kind of sweet. Like Blair is sort of an unintended medium, and he really just is so kind-hearted and really wants to help people. And so the kids, sort of the older kids, sort of band together to support him and help him. And they'll be like, okay, you are talking to so and so and she needs our help. Like, what does she need? What's wrong? It's really great. I think the Headless Cupid is probably considered the best one, but I always loved Blair's Nightmare. And the famous Stanley kidnapping case, where they are on vacation in Italy and they are indeed kidnapped because they're like, oh, you're wealthy, wealthy American kids, and they get kidnapped. And how they get out of that kidnapping and what happens to them is really interesting. It's sort of a mystery. It kind of reminds me of Mary Stuart's like the Moon Spinners or something like that. But Blair's Nightmare is really interesting, and I loved that one. I actually had another teacher read that to us um, later. She's like, "Oh, you've all read The Headless Cupid, haven't you?" And like we hadn't. This was like third grade anyway, and we all just sort of blinked at her. And she's like, "Anyway, this book's really good," and she read it to us, and I really loved this one. It's not as scary to me as The Headless Cupid. So now here we have something I'm going to confess. I have not read all of Diana Wynne Jones's books. And you know from watching this now how much I have always loved her books. But I sort of like have collected them over the years. Some of them have been out of print in this country. Some of them are just hard to find. And so I will find one. And I honestly like sort of almost put off reading them. Like I have never read this one, The Time of the Ghost, but I really want to, but also I sort of want to be in the exact right mood for it because this is the last time that I will get to read Diana Wynne Jones's The Time of the Ghost for the first time, if that makes sense. So I have been putting this off and I feel like I'm almost ready for it. But this is your moment of Diana Wynne Jones for the week because I think we haven't had one in a little while. The Time of the Ghost. I know nothing about it. I haven't even read the flap. Found it at a library sale a couple of years ago, and I'm like, completes my collection almost, so I must have it. The Owl Service by Alan Garner, who also wrote The Weird Stone of Brisingamen. Gammon, however you say that. But The Owl Service is a really interesting book about a family that goes to live at a house in Wales. They are sort of an upper class British family, and the daughter is almost like possessed by this. The girl who used to live there, her spirit is still there, and it all has to do with this like set of dishes that have this pattern on them that could be owls or could be flowers, and she becomes like weirdly obsessed with it, and it looks like history is about to play out again with her and a couple of boys that are there, and how that ended in tragedy like 100 years before. It looks like it's about to happen again. It's really good, really interesting. There are so many excellent graphic novels about ghosts out right now, and I love it. I just read this one. It just came out, Taxi Ghost by Sophie Escobas, who is a French-Canadian author who also does the Witches of Brooklyn series. This book is set in Montreal, and this girl gets her first period, and with that, becoming an adult, becoming a woman, comes the ability to see ghosts. And so she and her sister are driving to work, her sister's work one day, and suddenly she can hear and see all these people in their car with them, commenting on them and basically hitching a ride in their car so they don't have to walk through the snow because they don't like it. It was super fun. I love her style of art. There's a shout out to the Witches of Brooklyn as well. This is really well done. It's not at all scary. It's more like along the lines of fun, but also like helping ghosts like sort of sort out the business that they couldn't for themselves. Ghosts by Raina Telgemeier, my daughter is like her biggest fan. She has all her books and she loved them. And this one is different from her other stuff because it's not about her. It's a separate story and it is really good. It deals also with chronic illness. One of the kids in this has a chronic illness and it deals with death and with ghosts and with the Day of the Dead and Halloween and all kinds of things. And it is a really cool, fun book. And if you love Raina Telgemeier, and you've read Smile and Guts and those sisters, you absolutely have to read Ghosts. It's so good. And speaking of books we don't own and we can't figure out why, Delicates is the sequel to a book called Sheets by Brenna Thumler. And we love both of them, but I can't believe we don't have Sheets. And yes, guessing from the titles, Sheets and Delicates takes place in a laundromat and is about ghosts. And I love how the ghosts are wearing sheets so that they can be seen and have shape. And it's very like classic ghost, like what the heck is happening? But like, hey, if I put on a sheet from the laundromat, you can actually see me when we carry on this conversation. I super loved it. Both of them. All right, moving on up into our more, those all three were sort of on the border, middle grade into YA, moving into YA, Sabriel by Garth Nix. Garth Nix is a stunning writer. If you do not know his work, this is one of my favorites. It's the first book in a series. They are excellent. They really rapidly sort of move on up into being upper young adult, but not in a way where I'm like, oh no, this is too spicy for the kids, but just in the characters being a little bit older, teens, and dealing with some like adult decision making and things like that, if that makes sense. But Sabriel and her dad, her legacy is that basically they can go into the land of the dead and they can retrieve people, they can move people along, all this stuff. It's a really fascinating magic system. It is a really fascinating world that he has built. It's really cool. It has sort of a early 1900s technology level like vibe. It sort of reminds you of like people going off to World War One with the battles they fight and the level of technology that they have. But then at the same time, they've got these people who are essentially necromancers and wizards who can raise the dead and speak to the dead and all this stuff. It's really cool, very different. And it's a finished series. There are several books, 4 or 5, and some short stories as well. It's really great. In the Shadows. This was written by Kirsten White and illustrated by Jim DiBartolo. Um, Very cool, sort of almost like I guess it's a graphic novel. It's sort of mixed media. Some of the story is told entirely in pictures, and some of it is told entirely in texts, and is a really really great ghost story. There's romance. It's got everything in it. It's a really also heavy book, like really glossy pages, really cool. It feels good. It feels good to read it as well. All right. Anna Dressed in Blood by Kendara Blake. I actually thought this book was gonna be like I would not be able to handle this, but I got an arc and I'm like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do this. Ended up absolutely loving it. Loving it. This kid, he goes out and he gets rid of ghosts. He just goes out, that's his job. He can see them, he can hear them, and he puts them to rest, sometimes violently if he has to, because ghosts are just sort of out to get the living in this world. But he meets this one, and she really does have unfinished business. And she's like, I am not trying to hurt anyone. I didn't do the things they accused me of. I want you to help me get the actual murderer who murdered my family and also me. And so he ends up helping her and falling in love with her. It is so cool. And there is a sequel and it's been out a few years. Love these books. And they are sort of my threshold for scary any young adult book, but at the same time, because you love Anna, immediately you're like, she's not scary. She's an awesome character. Haunting Violet by Alexandra Harvey is about the Victorians. If you know, you know, but the Victorians were in so into seances, and they would hire mediums to read their future and to contact the ghost of their husband. And they were all charlatans. They were all like rapping on the table with their own knuckles and having their assistants blow cold air on the ladies' necks and stuff like that. And it's called table rapping and stuff like that. And Haunting Violet is about a girl and her mom. Her mom is a table rapper. She is Madam, whatever, and she goes in with her big scarves and tells people, "Oh, it's your husband Frank, and he wants you to know he always loved you." And Frank, speak to us now. And somebody waves the curtains, with a invisible wire or something like that. And but Violet is the real deal. Violet can actually speak to ghosts. And so it's a really great story. And it's just sort of like, does she want to use this power to just make money off of sad people who are grieving? Does she want to just become a charlatan like her mom and just like start faking it, and stuff like that? It's really good. The Name of the Star by Maureen Johnson is a Jack the Ripper murder mystery ghost story. There's everything is in this book. I don't want to say anything else and spoil it. It's the first book in a trilogy about a girl going to a boarding school in England. The trilogy is now complete, and all of them have this very supernatural element to it. First one was my favorite. I've never been one of those people who's like super into Jack the Ripper and stuff like that and gets into the lore and the conspiracy theories, but this still was very fun. And it's sort of like stuff that and would recognize, like the mystery and stuff like that. It's really cool. All right, moving up into the books for you grown-ups, but starting off soft with The Ghost and Mrs. Muir by R.A. Dick. I love this movie with my entire heart and soul. If you have not seen the movie, you absolutely must. It is a sheer delight. It is gorgeous and romantic. My kids were always like, "Oh, black and white movie." Like nobody likes black and white. I have a hard time with black and white. My eyesight is so terrible that sometimes I can't see black and white movies really well. Um, Even with my contacts in or whatever. But I love this movie. I think it's so beautiful. And then I found out a few years ago it was originally a novel. And so I got the book and was not disappointed. It is different from the movie, but it is different in a fun way. And I really love this book, The Ghost of Mrs. Muir by R.A. Dick. This is actually part of a series that is like vintage movie classics, that is like basically things that were mostly known as a movie and not so much that they were originally a novel or a play. And the movie is starring Jean Tierney, one of the world's most gorgeous women who's ever lived, and Rex Harrison. Absolutely stunner. Read the book, watch the movie. You're welcome. We have to talk about Graham Joyce. I will tell my whole Graham Joyce story another day with another one of his books. But for right now, let's talk about Graham Joyce. He's a British author who very sadly passed away a couple of years ago of cancer. And every one of his books is just a stunner. So well written, so different, sort of horror fantasy, if you will, dealing with just some really unusual, dark things. This one I actually don't even keep with my fantasy books. I actually keep these two that I'm going to talk about, both of them upstairs on the shelf where I just keep my literature because it's very subtle. It's very subtle magic. It's a very subtle ghost story. I don't even want to tell you anything about this book except look how pretty the cover is and all that. Like, check out the sweet action. Um, because I feel like literally anything I would say about this book will be a massive spoiler. But it involves a married couple and a skiing holiday, and that is all I'm going to say about it. But Graham Joyce is an absolute international treasure, won multiple awards, sadly left us way too soon. He's written such great things. The Silent Land was so good. And I got to the end and I'm like, absolutely loved it. It's sheer ambiance, that book. A lot of his books are just like the ambiance. But this is probably my favorite of his book. The Facts of Life is just a story about this little boy in England growing up post World War II. And he's just being, his mom is kind of difficult. She's kind of Absent-minded is one way to put it. She's a flibberty-gibbet, whatever you want to say. She says and does odd things. By the way, her name is Cassandra. And so he gets moved around. He doesn't have a dad, and he gets moved around to different relatives. He has all these aunts, also his grandmother, and they all take turns raising him because his mom clearly is not fit to do that. And she just sort of floats around, does her thing. And this sweet little boy is raised by the grandma, and he just occasionally, just like it's a thing that happens, has these encounters. Like he finds hidden in a culvert a German plane that was shot down, and the pilot is still sitting in it. And so he goes and talks to the pilot and stuff like that and gets the pilot's information out of him, so that they can contact his family and tell him where his body is. And it's just so matter of fact, and no one ever says anything about it like ghosts or and his the family believes him and stuff like that. They're just like, well, we should definitely write a letter to those people then if you know where their son is, and things like that. It is sheer delight. And it just talks about also just coming of age, just things he encounters at school and, getting their first television set and all those things. And then just every so often there's something where he basically encounters the dead and talks to them in just this gentle, kind, sort of mature for his age way. I love it. I could not love it more. And I think my sister, when she read it, also, I think she basically read the last page and then went right back to the front and started it over again because she's like, I can't leave this book yet. It's that good. Trigger Warning by Neil Gaiman is one of his short story collections. And um, all of his short story collections, I have a hard time with because I feel like some of these stories are just way too scary. But there is a story in this one specifically that I want to talk about that is called Click Clack the Rattlebag. It is hands down the most terrifying short story I have ever read. And I've read like all of Ray Bradbury's stuff, all of that. I unwill as I was an unwilling witness to the first scary stories to tell in the dark book being read out loud to me by my fourth grade teacher and wanted to sit and cry the entire time. And Click Clack the Rattlebag is the most terrifying story I've ever read in my life. I literally almost wet my pants when I read it. I think about it all the time. I could never read it again. Terrifying. So if you're looking for just like a short story to read, like on Halloween or something, that will just absolutely terrify you, it's in Trigger Warning. Under Heaven by Guy Gavriel Kay, just because I wanted to talk about Guy's books and how much I love them, and I do love all of them. And Under Heaven, I just adored. And Under Heaven has a very interesting type of ghost situation in it where this young man who was in a war, in order to sort of pay back for the people he killed, he has taken on the penance that he gave to himself of burying the dead in this valley where there was an absolute massacre. There are literally thousands of bodies, and everyone just sort of walked away and were like, let's leave it and pretend this didn't happen. We won. Nobody needs this valley. It's destroyed anyway. No one's going to use it for farmland or anything anytime in the future. So everyone just sort of left. And this one soldier has remained behind to bury the dead. And the ghosts have not only forgiven him, but really honor him for the work he has done and his sacrifice. But let me very quickly also mention a few books that I do not own, um, because they are just way too scary for me. Odd Thomas by Dean Koontz and the Odd Thomas books. Um, they are so good. And actually, I should own them. I would be okay with them. But Odd Thomas is a guy who can, in fact, see the dead. And he helps those he can and stuff like that. But also, if he really notices the dead or pays attention to sort of supernatural creatures, these other creatures realize that he can and they're attracted to that. So there's sort of these evil shadow creatures like out to get him. And so he is constantly pretending he is not seeing the things he's seeing. And the things he's seeing are like Elvis. He sees Elvis all the time. And it's so good. I love him because he's such a precious person. He's such a precious young man. Three Quarters Dead by Richard Peck, which is a young adult novel. You know Richard Peck. He's A Long Way from Chicago and all those things, A Year Down Yonder. And he wrote this book based on the most intense premise. I was like, well, obviously, I heard him talk about it right before he wrote it at an event. And basically, this girl, this is a real thing that happened, by the way, this first part, a real thing that happened. This girl's friends were on their way to pick her up for a party, the three friends, and they texted her, "We're coming to get you," right as they got into a fatal car accident. And she technically received the text, "We're coming to get you," after her friends had died. And that is a real thing that happened. And he took that premise, just very tragic, and spun it into this insane ghost story with these teenage girls that come to pick up their friend after they've died, and it is really good. Um, and then the Mediator series by Meg Cabot, which are not at all scary. I actually just don't have them because I borrowed them from my sister back in the day. But before the Princess Diaries books, she wrote this whole series called The Mediator about a girl who can see ghosts. And she moves into an old historic home in California. And her bedroom specifically is being haunted by a very hot teenage boy ghost from about 100 years before. And it is really good. And they sort of go around solving ghost crimes for several books. And then she actually wrote, just a few years ago, she actually wrote like sort of a final book, sort of a like 10 years later, where are they now type of book. Really fun and satisfying, sort of honestly more romance, more of a supernatural mystery romance than like horror at all. So those are really fun. But then the scariest book that I have read that I still recommend to people is The Family Plot by Cherie Priest. This book I cannot own. I can't have it in the house. The minute I finished it, I took it back to the library because I couldn't have it in the house any longer. I loved every minute of it, but it still scares me to death. And The Family Plot is about a team of people that what they do is they go into homes that are like estate sales where like everything must go. The house is basically going to be sold for parts, and they go in and do the stuff like taking out the chandeliers and fixing them up to resell them, marble mantelpiece and things like that. Oh, this tile floor, this is, antique tile or marble from Italy and stuff like that, and they will rip it out and resell it. And it's a specific type of renovation thing that I've forgotten the name of, but yeah, they go in to do a house and the house is haunted, and I loved it. I could not sleep for like 2 days. I just laid there going, "What's that noise? Is it here? Is it coming for me?" So super scary, but really good if you like horror. The Family Plot by Cherie Priest. I loved all of Cherie's books. That one, though, especially gets to me. But now those are your recommendations for ghosts for this week. Hope you're all getting ready for Halloween, which just occurred to me like yesterday is next week. Oh my gosh, got to get some costumes on these kids. Anyway, so go out, read some spooky books, have fun, and we'll talk to you next week. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you like my fun videos. Thanks.